So with that, we bring in Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi, whose state law prompted the case that went all the way to the Supreme Court and led to the leaked draft opinion. Governor Reeves, good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to start by playing this soundbite from Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, who echoes Kathy Hochul's statements.
If you look around Chicago, we've got a number of states that have the so-called trigger laws that would ban abortion upon the reversal of Roe. I think the list is long, and Chicago is going to be an oasis in the Midwest, and we've got to be ready.
So, Governor, I guess one of the questions, you just heard David Lee Miller's report about how many people would then be traveling across state lines for abortions. Would you ban travel for abortions over state lines?
Well, thank you for having me on, Martha. And again, that's a conversation that I can't imagine a mayor of a city or a governor of a state trying to make their place an oasis to have people come there to abort unborn children. And I think that's the primary distinction here that must be made is that when you're talking about abortions, there is an unborn child in that womb, an unborn American citizen, and it's mind-boggling to me that these politicians would say this. I think that they are not only misreading the tea leaves, I think they're misreading the political dynamics out there, and they don't recognize that in America today, our abortion laws and what they're trying to do in their cities and their states make their abortion laws more and more like North Korea and China and less like the Western civilized world.
So, but I think one of the points of this Supreme Court decision, and we don't have it yet, which I would want to point out once again, we don't have it. We just have a leaked opinion from February. But the idea is that it was wrongly decided because this is a state right issue and that it should be decided by the states. So take me through what would happen in Mississippi, because you have a trigger law. So that would mean that when this decision comes out, there would then that day or the next day, any abortion would be banned in Mississippi. Is that correct?
Well, you are correct that those of us who believe that Roe v. Wade was wrongly decided, that if the court decides, and again, it's still a big if because we are talking about a leaked draft opinion, but if a majority of the justices decide to overturn Roe because they believe that it was wrongly decided, as I do, in 1972, you're exactly right. The decision-making would then go back to the democratic process such that the individual legislatures and the policy-making bodies, those involved in the democratic process in all 50 states would make decisions based upon what they view or their citizens wanted.
Right.
In a state like Mississippi, you're correct. We do have the case that's before the Supreme Court. It is a 15-week ban, but also in 2007, the Mississippi legislature passed legislation creating a trigger law. I would like to point out that at that time, the Speaker of the House of Representatives was a Democrat. The chairman of the Public Health Committee in the House of Representatives was a Democrat. And so that speaks a little bit to how far Democrats and the Democrat Party has moved to the left on this issue. But that trigger law says that within 10 days, the Attorney General of our state will certify that Roe v. Wade has been overturned and that abortion will be illegal in the state of Mississippi, with the exception of rape and the life of the mother.
I want to ask you about that exception in just a minute, but I guess so you're never going to get the 15 weeks, right? I mean, that 15 weeks is where most Americans are, and I realize we're going state by state under this construct, but our recent polling shows 54% of people think that 15 weeks is a reasonable time after which to ban abortion, and that was the law that was passed by your state legislature. So why not revert to that rather than something that happened in 2007?
Well, because the law that passed in 2007 made it clear that the trigger law, the trigger would come into effect in the event that the court overturns Roe. The 15-week ban, which is before the court, so the court has the ability to decide that the 15-week ban and upholding the 15-week ban is something that they want to do. If they choose to go further and do what we ask, which is ultimately overturn Roe, then our trigger law will come into effect. But Martha, to answer your question, why go beyond the 15-week ban? Because there are literally 63 million babies that were aborted over the last 51 years since 1972 in America. And if we go beyond the 15-week ban, then we have the chance to save babies' lives. That's the reason we would go
Governor,
beyond that.
I understand that, and I understand your argument absolutely. I'm just asking because the whole argument is that then the states would decide, the people would decide in each state, and the people in your state most recently decided on a 15-week ban. So I'm wondering if they will get what they voted for, or they will get something that goes back to 2007. And I think you've made that clear. I have two really quick questions I want to ask you. So you said for the life of the mother and rape are the two exceptions in Mississippi, correct?
That is correct.
So
in the 2007 bill that passed.
So here's my question. How is incest not rape?
Well, I think in many instances it is rape and would be defined as such. Now, why the legislature in 2007 made that particular distinction, I can't answer that question because I was not involved in the legislature at that time. But what I would tell you is, and to your previous question, why not give the people of Mississippi the 15-week ban? Because remember, the 15-week ban is really out of touch even with the Western world. There are 39 out of 42 countries in Europe that have more restrictions on abortion than Mississippi would have if that 15-week ban went into effect. And so,
well, I understand that.
It's just
but the question,
the
yeah, I just once again, the point is that each state would decide what the people of that state, when they go to the voting booth and it's a referendum or whatever it is, and in your state, what passed was this 15-week ban. So I'm just trying to make sure that I understand how it's all going to work. Just before I let you go, one more question. Would you still allow abortion pills to be sent to people in Mississippi if they chose to use them before that 15-week ban, if there wasn't a total ban in place?
If they had treatment by a physician, that would be an option for some individuals.
Okay. Governor Reeves, thank you very much. It's great to have you with us today. I appreciate you answering the questions. Thank you, sir.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe right now.